Jimmy Kimmel thought he had the upper hand, until Stallone answered with a line so sharp, so unexpected, the internet's been talking about it ever since. It was just another Wednesday night at the El Capitan Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. The audience was packed, the lights were warm, and the laughter track operator was already warming up their button. Jimmy Kimmel's team moved like clockwork, makeup touch-ups, teleprompters loading monologue lines, producers giving last-minute instructions in hushed tones. Nothing about this night screamed history in the making. Sylvester Stallone arrived right on schedule, not a second late. Dressed in a navy blue sport coat, black shirt underneath, he looked relaxed, even slightly amused. The man's been doing talk shows since before half the crew was born. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Plug the second season of Tulsa King, maybe shared a funny story from set, then go home and let the PR team do the rest. No curveballs expected. But tension had been brewing. Just a week earlier, Stallone had raised eyebrows with a casual comment in an interview with the Palm Beach Post. When asked about leadership and character in Hollywood, he made a quick pivot, calling Donald Trump a wrecking ball, sure, but sometimes you need one to clear the junk. The internet did what it does. Some people cheered, others dragged him, but Stallone didn't double down or backpedal. He let the comment breathe, which, in today's climate, almost guarantees someone's going to press it live. And that someone, of course, was Jimmy Kimmel. Kimmel's known for his sharp tongue. He plays it safe with most guests, but isn't shy about jabbing those who stir controversy, especially if politics are involved. His writers likely saw the Stallone comment as gold, a perfect setup to roast the action hero turned political commentator. After all, Kimmel had taken aim at Trump supporting his celebrities before. Why stop now? Backstage, Stallone sipped water and cracked a few jokes with the hair guy. You could tell he'd done this dance 100 times. But if anyone noticed, his smile didn't quite touch his eyes. Not tonight. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. There's a difference. The show kicked off on cue. Kimmel rolled out the usual monologue, topical jokes, pokes at tech billionaires, a quab at a recent Hollywood divorce, and then came the transition. Ladies and gentlemen, my next guest is the man who made boxing gloves fashionable, who took on Russia in the Cold War, and who apparently thinks Donald Trump is the second coming of Abraham Lincoln. Please welcome Sylvester Stallone. Some in the audience laughed. A few winced. Stallone walked on stage, smiling wide, waving to the crowd. He shook Kimmel's hand and took his seat. Kimmel didn't waste time. Before Stallone could even settle in, the host leaned forward and said with a sly grin, "So sly, Trump, huh? I guess Rocky took one too many hits to the head." Laughter, applause, but not from everyone. Stallone looked at him. Not angry, not offended, just still, quiet. The camera caught a flicker in his eyes, something between really and okay, kid, let's see what you've got. He tilted his head slightly and smiled. "Yeah, maybe," he said, pausing just long enough to pull the rug out from under the room's laughter. "But at least I didn't get slapped on Oscar night and do nothing." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric. And then came the eruption. But what no one expected was how Stallone would hit back. The crowd erupted into a wave of laughter that felt different, less like a routine audience chuckle and more like something alive. People weren't just reacting to a good line. They were reacting to who delivered it. Stallone had just flipped the script on live TV, and everyone in the room knew it. Jimmy Kimmel, for the first time that night, looked thrown. His smirk faltered. He leaned back a little in his chair, blinking. "Okay," he said with a forced chuckle. "We're going there tonight." Stallone didn't follow up right away. He let the moment breathe, owning the silence in a way only one with his experience could. He didn't need to shout or raise his hands or look for a backup. He just leaned forward slightly and continued in that gravelly voice everyone knows. "You know, Jimmy," he said, "I've taken and delivered punches on screen for more years than I can count. I'm used to people coming at me. I'm also used to getting back up." His tone wasn't defensive, it was deliberate. But these days, everyone's swinging and nobody's standing for anything. There was a murmur from the audience, quiet but noticeable. Kimmel tried to cut in. "Well, hey, I was just messing around." Stallone didn't bite. "I know you were," he said with a nod, "but maybe that's the problem. Everything's a joke. Say something real, and people get nervous. Crack wise, and suddenly you're safe again. It wasn't angry. It was calm, focused. He wasn't roasting Kimmel anymore. He was reaching past him, to the people watching. He glanced at the crowd. Look, I get it. I said something. People reacted. That's fine. I'm not trying to preach. I'm not a politician. But I've spent 50 years making characters who believe in something. Loyalty, courage, persistence. They weren't perfect. Neither am I. But I made damn sure they meant something. Applause bubbled up again, louder this time. Not just from the audience in the studio, but from the crew standing off stage. Cameramen, grips, even the stage manager. They were clapping. Kimmel was scrambling to regain his footing. Okay, well, I don't want to turn this into a TED Talk. Stallone turned to him, this time with a half smile that cut sharper than any insult. Nah, Jimmy, TED Talks are for people who rehearse their truth. I'm just saying mine. The audience laughed again, not because it was a joke, but because it was real. It didn't feel scripted. Stallone wasn't performing anymore. He was just talking, and people were listening. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Kimmel wasn't in control of the interview anymore. He was hanging on. Trying to steer things back into safer territory, he said, "Let's talk about Tulsa King. The show's got you doing some wild stunts for a guy your age." Stallone raised his eyebrows. You mean for a guy who's 77 and still more flexible than your writers? Laughter. Another shot landed, not mean-spirited, just clean, clever, and lethal. Kimmel chuckled. I walked right into that. You did, Stallone said, pointing a finger at him. But don't worry, happens to a lot of people. It was that kind of rhythm, quick jabs, light but direct. Stallone was doing what he'd done in boxing rings on screen his whole life, only now he was doing it with words, calm, collected, dangerous in the best way. He adjusted in his seat, took a sip of water, and leaned back. You can make jokes about Rocky all you want, he added. But Rocky didn't quit. That's why people still care. The audience applauded again, louder than before. There was no studio cue light for that, just honest, unfiltered approval. But Sly wasn't finished, not even close. The audience was leaning in now, not just entertained, but attentive. It wasn't just another celebrity interview anymore. Stallone had turned a talk show couch into something more like a fireside bench, and every word coming out of his mouth was landing like it carried weight. Jimmy Kimmel, to his credit, had calmed down a bit. He wasn't smiling as much now, but he also wasn't pushing back. There was a shift. A kind of respect had quietly settled over the room. Maybe it was earned. Maybe it was forced. Either way, it was there. You know what I think is funny, Stallone said, pausing to roll his shoulders slightly, is how everyone's always looking for something to believe in, but nobody wants to say it out loud first. Everybody's waiting for someone else to go first. That's the problem. Kimmel raised an eyebrow. So you think it's your job to go first? Stallone gave a half shrug. Not my job, just my habit. I didn't grow up with much. I didn't have money, didn't have clout, but I had a voice. Took me a long time to figure out how to use it. I wrote Rocky on a coffee table in a one-bedroom apartment with a dog I could barely afford to feed. There was no pity in his voice, just memory. That script got rejected dozens of times. Studios offered me money to sell it, but they didn't want me. They wanted someone prettier, someone smoother. I said no, because if I'm going to put my name on something, I need to believe in it, even if no one else does. The room was completely still now. Even Kimmel was listening. Stallone smiled slightly and glanced at the crowd. I've watched this industry chew people up for less. Good actors, good people, who didn't play the game, who didn't say the right thing at the right time. It's all timing now. Who you follow, who you unfollow, who you tweet, who you retweet. He turned back to Jimmy. So yeah, I said something about Trump. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't a stunt. It was a comment, one man's opinion. People freaked out, but if people freak out over words, that says more about them than it does about me. Applause started again. No one was directing it. It just happened. Kimmel cleared his throat, trying to keep the flow going. You've always had a kind of grit to you, he said. You think that's what helped you survive Hollywood? Stallone nodded. Grit and the ability to ignore people who act like they know better. You survive this town by knowing when to speak and when to stay quiet. And when you do speak, mean it. He paused, then leaned forward again. The truth is, Jimmy, I'm not trying to be right. I'm just trying to be real. That's what people connect to. That's what lasts. There it was again, that pause, the stillness. He let his words settle, knowing full well they'd carry further that way. You don't have to agree with everything I say, Stallone continued, softer now. But you know I mean it. And that, in this business, is rare. Kimmel gave a short nod. He wasn't trying to be the clever host anymore. He was just the guy sitting across from Stallone, realizing the conversation had become something bigger than both of them. A young woman in the front row clapped first. Others joined in seconds later. Stallone smiled, gave a small wave, then settled back into his chair again. Let's talk about the new season of Tulsa King, Kimmel finally said, carefully easing into the original purpose of the interview. But even as they shifted topics, everyone watching knew the real moment had already happened. But Kimmel tried to steer the conversation away, hoping to regain control. Kimmel smiled, but it didn't quite hit his eyes. He was back in host mode, trying to smooth the energy and keep the show moving. So, Sly, you ever think about running for office? I mean, the way you're talking, you've got half the country ready to vote for you already. It was meant as a joke, a soft jab to lighten the mood, but it opened the door just enough. Stallone tilted his head slightly, like he was measuring how much of himself to give. He let a few beats pass before replying. Only if I get to debate you first, he said deadpan. The audience exploded, again. But this time, even Kimmel laughed for real. He leaned back in his chair and clapped once. Okay, fair enough. But Stallone wasn't just tossing lines. He saw something in the moment. His expression didn't change much, but his tone softened. People always say I'd make a good politician, he said. I don't know. I think I'd rather play one in a movie. That way I don't have to lie. That got a mix of laughs and a few claps, but Stallone wasn't fishing for them. He was just saying what he thought. Kimmel leaned in, curious now. Do you ever worry it could hurt your career? You know, saying stuff like that. Stallone looked him straight in the eye. Jimmy, I'm 77 years old. You think I'm worried about career points now? I've done the work. I've told my stories. If I lose a deal because someone doesn't like how I vote, then maybe that deal wasn't worth it to begin with. The crowd stirred again. He wasn't being provocative. He was being honest. And that was what had made it hit. You reach a point in life where you realize all the awards, all the red carpets, they don't really mean anything if you're afraid to speak, he continued. Fear of being wrong, fear of being alone. It keeps people quiet, and quiet people don't change anything. Kimmel nodded slowly. So what's the lesson? Don't be afraid to piss people off? Stallone smiled. No, don't be afraid to be yourself. Pissing people off is just a side effect. Laughter again, but this time it came with clapping. The kind that said, yeah, that makes sense. In social media, it was already on fire. Clips of Stallone's one-liners, the Oscar slap joke, the debate you first moment. They were already circulating across TikTok, YouTube, X, and Facebook. Different angles, subtitles, even remixes. People weren't just watching. They were reacting, arguing, quoting, commenting things like Sly said what we're all thinking, and finally someone in Hollywood with a backbone. Meanwhile, in the green room, the producers were glued to their phones, watching the likes and shares shoot up by the second. One assistant whispered to another, "We've never had this kind of real-time reaction. Ever." On set, Stallone noticed the applause die down and took one final swing. You know, there's a reason Rocky never ran for office, he said. He fought in the ring, he fought for people, but he never wanted power. He just wanted to matter. That's the difference. The studio fell into a rare kind of quiet, not silence, just stillness. People were processing it. Kimmel gave a small nod. It wasn't a host reaction. It was a human one. You're a different kind of guest, Sly, Stallone smirked. Yeah, I come with a message and a left hook. But the real story wasn't just about a roast. It was about respect. By the time Stallone left the studio that night, the internet was already treating the interview like a cultural event. Clips from the show were everywhere. The Oscar slap line had its own meme format by sunrise. The debate you first moment became a trending soundbite on TikTok. And Twitter, or X as it's called now, was a battleground of quotes, arguments, and praise. People weren't just reacting. They were feeling something. Whether they agreed with Stallone or not, they couldn't deny he handled himself with clarity, with calm, and above all, with purpose. There was no yelling, no forced laughter, no desperate attempt to be liked. Just a man who meant what he said, and said it well. Entertainment media had a field day. Variety ran the headline. Stallone silences Kimmel with brutal, brilliant comeback. Deadline called it the most genuine moment on late night in years. Even outlets that typically avoided anything remotely political had to cover it, because this wasn't really about politics. It was about presence. That's what people kept saying online. Not Stallone owned Kimmel or Sly went off. It was deeper than that. It was, he handled it. In Nashville, a local radio host opened his show with a breakdown of the interview. In Bakersfield, a small-town barbershop played the clip on repeat for anyone walking in. At a community center in Mesa, Arizona, two retired veterans were overheard saying, "He still fights for what matters, just in a different ring now." There were critics, of course. A few pundits took jabs. Some late-night competitors made side remarks, accusing Stallone of bringing politics where it didn't belong. But those voices were drowned out. Not because people agreed with Stallone on every word, but because they respected the way he handled the moment. There was no apology tour, no PR backpedaling. His team didn't issue statements or corrections. Stallone went silent and let the moment speak for itself. And in that silence, the audience filled in the blanks. He wasn't trying to be edgy. He wasn't making a stand. He just said something real, then moved on. That's what stuck. That's what people couldn't stop talking about. In the days following, talk show hosts debated whether Kimmel lost control of his own show. Industry insiders whispered about Stallone's team fielding interview requests from platforms that normally wouldn't have reached out, because people wanted more of that. Back in Los Angeles, at a small Italian restaurant off Fairfax, Stallone had dinner with two old friends, guys who'd known him since before Rocky. The waitress told them people had been stopping by all day asking if he's the guy who made Kimmel shut up. Stallone just laughed. "I didn't shut him up," he said. "I just reminded him I wasn't here to play his game." The moment had passed, but the ripple effect remained. A talent manager in Scottsdale told a young client, "You want to know what makes a star? Watch Stallone on Kimmel. That's it. Not the muscles, not the credits, the control." And maybe that was the part that struck people the most, the control. Because in a time when it seems like everyone's screaming, performing, trying to one-up each other on outrage, Stallone came in with no script, no agenda, just a calm voice and a steel spine. He didn't beg for applause. He earned it. But there was more to this moment than a comeback. It struck a nerve. People kept replaying the clip, not just for the laughs, but to feel something again. That mix of confidence, clarity, and composure hit a nerve in a way that even Stallone himself probably didn't fully expect. It wasn't about Trump. It wasn't even about Kimmel. It was about someone finally saying what others had been tiptoeing around, without anger, without fear. In a studio culture obsessed with viral outrage, Stallone's mic drop didn't come with shouting or finger pointing. It came with poise. That's what made it land. He said it like he's been through things, one viewer wrote on a Reddit thread. Not like someone trying to be relevant, but like someone who already knows who he is. And that was it. The difference wasn't in what Stallone said. It was in how he carried it, in the stillness of his delivery, in the confidence of a man who doesn't measure himself against applause meters or Twitter trends. He'd seen too much for that. At a gas station just outside Amarillo, a middle-aged trucker named Dean stood beside a pump, watching the clip on his phone. He shook his head and muttered, "That's how you talk when you ain't scared of losing anything." In Fresno, a retired teacher told her book club, "I don't care about politics, but Stallone, that was character. We need more of that." And that's the word people kept using. Character, not celebrity, not charisma. Character. It's a word that's been losing traction in entertainment circles. Too old-fashioned, too rigid. But Stallone brought it back that night, without saying it once. He didn't try to be inspirational. He didn't give a motivational speech. But when he said, "I'm not trying to be right, I'm just trying to be real," something clicked. In a world where scripted outrage dominates the screen and influencers play dress up with integrity, that kind of statement felt like a punch to the chest, not aggressive, just solid, like bedrock. And while some outlets tried to spin it, the public didn't buy it. People had watched the clip. They'd felt it. You can't manufacture that kind of presence. The lesson for many, was less about politics and more about posture, how you carry yourself when your values are challenged, how you hold steady when the easy move would be to play along, laugh, or backpedal. A high school debate coach in Flagstaff showed the clip in her classroom, not for the politics, but as a lesson in composure under pressure. This, she told her students, is how you handle disagreement without losing your voice or your head. That kind of composure is rare, especially now. But Stallone reminded people that it still exists, that it still matters. In the days after, he stayed quiet, no tweets, no interviews. He let the noise do what it does, knowing it would eventually wear itself out. Meanwhile, his words kept circulating. And as they did, people kept asking the same thing. Why did this hit so hard? The answer wasn't complicated, because Stallone walked into a room where the script was already written, and he flipped it without raising his voice, because he reminded people what authenticity looks like when it's not trying to sell anything, because he stood his ground, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty, because he reminded us that the most powerful statements aren't always the loudest, they're just the ones that don't flinch. And that's where the power really was, not in what he said, but how he carried it. When the noise faded, when the likes slowed down and the clip stopped trending, what stuck with people wasn't the viral moment. It was the feeling it left behind. Stallone didn't walk out of that studio a different man. He walked out the same guy who walked in. The difference was, we saw something we weren't expecting. Not the movie star, not the icon, just the man. There was a reason it struck such a chord. So much of today's conversation, on TV and online, even in real life, feels filtered, calculated, safe. Everyone's protecting their image, their brand, their job. But Stallone, he didn't care about any of that. He wasn't looking to score points. He wasn't trying to impress. He simply said what he believed. That's rare now, and people notice rare. Even people who disagreed with what he said found themselves saying, "Yeah, but he was honest." That's something we're starved for. Honesty without theatrics, strength without ego, opinion without shouting. And maybe that's why people shared the clip, not because Stallone won some battle on live TV, but because for 5 minutes, someone showed what grown-up confidence looks like. He didn't insult Jimmy Kimmel. He didn't storm off. He didn't play the victim. He didn't apologize to keep his name clean. He stayed steady, made his point, cracked a smile, and moved on. No damage control, no drama, just character. You could see it in the way people talked about it after. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about how Stallone responded. In a time when reactions define reputation, his was measured, grounded, and respectful. A gym owner in El Paso played the clip during a break between classes. When one of the younger guys asked, "Why is everyone talking about this?" the owner said, "Because that's how men used to talk." Not to put anyone down, not to glorify the past, but to point out something that's been missing. There's a quiet strength in standing your ground without stepping on someone else. That's what Stallone did. And that's what made the moment feel bigger than just TV. For people watching at home, the takeaway wasn't say what you think no matter what. It was deeper than that. It was, if you're going to speak, know what you stand for. And when you stand, do it without apology, but also without hate. That's the kind of presence that stays with people long after the clip ends. Kimmel moved on. The show rolled on. The news cycle churned. But that moment stayed with viewers, not because it was loud, because it was real. And in a world full of noise, real still matters. So maybe the message wasn't political at all. Maybe it was human. Maybe Stallone's quiet mic drop was a reminder that strength doesn't have to shout, that dignity doesn't bend. That confidence isn't about being right, it's about being sure. And that's something anyone from any background, any belief system, any age can learn from. So if this story hits you somewhere real, if it reminded you of how important it is to speak with honesty and stand with grace, don't just watch and move on. Share it, talk about it, and hold on to that feeling. Because when the cameras stop rolling and the applause dies down, all we really leave behind is character. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories that say something. Stories that remind us who we are and who we can be.